The millionaire was shocked when he saw the maid protecting his special child, and his reaction was, "If this story interested you, please subscribe to our channel and let us know which city you're watching from." Let's begin. On the northern edge of Miami, within the luxurious gated community of Star Island, stood one of the most imposing mansions in the area. It was a modern structure with elegant lines, perfectly symmetrical gardens, and an immaculate white facade, where order, silence, and, above all, the appearance of perfection reigned. This was the home of Edward Miller, a technology entrepreneur known in powerful circles for supplying advanced digital security systems to government agencies in Florida and other states. Well-connected and extremely wealthy, Edward was a man of meticulous habits, discreet and perpetually busy. His routine consisted of meetings, trips, and multi-million-dollar contracts. At home, his presence was almost symbolic, a ghost who occasionally crossed the silent corridors before disappearing again into his office or on another business trip. Since his first wife, Helen, had passed away suddenly 3 years earlier due to heart complications, Edward had become even more absorbed in his work, as if codes and algorithms were a safe refuge from the pain he still carried. Just a few months after her death, to the surprise of everyone who knew him, Edward remarried. His new wife was Bianca, a sophisticated 34-year-old woman, cold in her elegant detachment and perfectly integrated into the social circles of Miami's elite. With her always impeccably styled blonde hair and discreet but visibly expensive jewelry, Bianca commanded the mansion like a general. With unquestionable precision and discipline, the house was also home to Sophia, the 7-year-old daughter Edward had with Helen. Sophia was a child with Down syndrome, with sweet features, expressive almond-shaped eyes, and a smile that was rarely seen by visitors or even the household staff. The girl spent her days confined to a large room on the upper floor, under the care of tutors, therapists, and nurses hired directly by Bianca. According to her stepmother, the girl needed peace, a strict routine, and a controlled environment. The version that circulated among the few who knew of her existence was that Sophia was too fragile to cope with the outside world and was therefore better kept inside, protected from everything and everyone. On a sunny Wednesday morning, typical of Miami, Deborah Smith, a 29-year-old woman from the working-class neighborhood of Liberty City, walked through the imposing gates of the mansion. A former public school teacher, Deborah had been out of education for over a year after budget cuts closed her school in the suburbs. Since then, she had been looking for jobs that would allow her to support her ailing mother and pay the overdue rent on her small apartment. Her modest resume and reserved demeanor made her an ideal fit for the profile demanded by Bianca, who hired her through an agency specializing in domestic services for high-end families. Deborah arrived promptly at 7 in the morning, as instructed. She was greeted by the housekeeper, Mrs. Peterson, a 60-year-old woman with eyes that seemed to have seen more than they would ever reveal. "Welcome, dear," said Mrs. Peterson, leading her through the marble entrance hall. "Mrs. Bianca is very demanding and likes everything in its proper place. Pay close attention to every detail I'm about to show you." As they walked through the corridors, Deborah noticed the impersonal tone of the mansion. There were no photographs on the walls, no sounds of life echoing through the rooms. It was a house from a magazine, perfect and untouched, but without a soul. The designer furniture, contemporary art, and flawless orchid arrangements created the atmosphere of a museum, not a home. Mrs. Peterson showed her each room on the first floor with military precision, explaining the cleaning quirks, the specific products to be used on each surface, and the established schedules for each task. As they reached the staircase leading to the second floor, the housekeeper slowed her pace. "The second floor is more private," she said, lowering her voice. "We only go up to clean when authorized. Mrs. Bianca has a notification system for that." Deborah nodded, sensing there was something unsaid in the housekeeper's words. At 9 o'clock sharp, Bianca appeared, descending the stairs with impeccable posture. She wore a navy blue silk outfit and high heels, despite being at home. Her green eyes sized up Deborah from head to toe without any warmth. "Good morning," Bianca said, extending a hand in a formal greeting. "I trust Mrs. Peterson has explained how we operate here. We have precise and non-negotiable routines." "Good morning, ma'am." "Yes, she explained everything." You can count on my work and discretion, Deborah replied, feeling a chill run down her spine as Bianca's eyes settled on her. Excellent. Discretion is paramount in this house. Mr. Miller works with confidential information, and we receive important people. Nothing you see or hear here is to leave these walls, Bianca said, her velvety voice carrying a tone of veiled threat. During the first few days, Deborah performed her duties with quiet efficiency. She cleaned, organized, and observed. Orders were given coldly, smiles were rare, and control was absolute. Bianca explained each task with military precision, demanding that schedules be strictly adhered to, that towels be folded into exactly 3 equal parts, and that cleaning products be exclusively of the brands she specified. It was only in the 3rd week that Sophia's name was officially mentioned, during a meeting between Bianca and the staff in the kitchen pantry. Starting today, there will be changes to the protocol for Sophia's room, Bianca announced, her tone as clinical, as if she were discussing a business procedure and not a child. Food trays will be left in the antechamber, and the nurse, Rebecca, will be the only one authorized to enter the room. Bed linens will be changed only on Mondays and Thursdays, always between 10 and 11 in the morning. Deborah noticed how Bianca avoided saying "my stepdaughter," or using any term that indicated a family relationship with the girl. Sophia was treated like an inventory item, something to be managed, not loved. "May I ask something, ma'am?" Deborah ventured, surprising herself with her own boldness. Bianca raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "Yes? The girl, Sophia. Does she never come downstairs? Does she not get any sun in the garden?" A tense silence fell over the kitchen. Mrs. Peterson shot Deborah a warning look, while Rebecca, a thin woman in her 40s, stared at the floor. "Sophia has complex special needs," Bianca replied in a controlled voice. "Her doctors recommend a calm and predictable environment. External stimuli disturb her deeply." Then, as if to shut down any further discussion, she added, "If we ever need your opinion on medical care, we will ask. Until then, please confine yourself to your duties." As the weeks went by, Deborah began to notice disturbing details. A food tray left untouched in the antechamber of Sophia's room. Faint marks on the girl's sheets, visible only when changing the bed. An evasive look in Nurse Rebecca's eyes when they passed in the hallway. And above all, the silence. The mansion was enormous, but it was as if the child didn't really exist. No one spoke of her. Edward, who left early and returned late, seemed to have no active role in his daughter's life. One afternoon, as Deborah was cleaning the second-floor hallway, she heard a faint sound coming from Sophia's room, a muffled cry almost inaudible. She stopped, her cleaning cloth suspended in mid-air, listening intently. The cry was followed by an adult voice, Rebecca's, she presumed, speaking in a sharp tone. "Stop that right now, or I'll have to give you more medicine. You know your stepmother doesn't like noise." Deborah felt a tightness in her chest. During her career as a teacher, she had worked with children with special needs and was well acquainted with the behavior of children with Down syndrome. Isolation was not good for them. In fact, proper socialization was crucial for their development. In the days that followed, Deborah paid even closer attention to everything related to the girl. She noticed how Nurse Rebecca often left the room just minutes after entering with medications, not enough time for any meaningful interaction with Sophia. She observed how Bianca checked the home pharmacy daily. Counting pills and making detailed notes in a notebook she kept locked in her desk. One morning, during the scheduled cleaning of Sophia's room, Deborah got her first glimpse of the girl. Sophia was sitting in an armchair near the window, looking out through the semi-drawn curtains. Her almond-shaped eyes seemed dull, lifeless, and her small body was unnaturally still for a 7-year-old. When she saw Deborah, her eyes widened slightly, but she showed no other reaction. "Good morning, Sophia," Deborah said softly as she began to tidy the room. "My name is Deborah." The girl didn't respond, but her eyes followed Deborah around the room. Rebecca, who was supervising the cleaning, cleared her throat. "It's not necessary to talk to her. She rarely responds and gets agitated with interactions," the nurse said, her tone professional but with a hint of nervousness. Deborah nodded, but she couldn't help but notice a faint glimmer in Sophia's eyes upon hearing a friendly voice. As she made the bed, she found something hidden under the pillow, a piece of paper with a child's drawing. It was a small figure, which Deborah presumed to be Sophia, with light brown hair alone in a corner of the paper, surrounded by black lines. There was also a larger figure with yellow hair and eyes that looked red. Rebecca quickly snatched the paper from her hands. "This isn't important," she said, folding the drawing and putting it in her uniform pocket. Something about that scribble deeply affected Deborah. It wasn't just a child's naive art. To her trained teacher's eyes, it looked like a cry for help. That night, Deborah couldn't sleep. In her small apartment in Liberty City, she looked at a photo of her class from the public school where she had taught. Smiling faces of children, some with special needs, all loved and cared for within their limitations. She compared those happy expressions with Sophia's empty gaze and felt a determination growing inside her. From that day on, Deborah began a subtle approach. A good morning left in the hallway when she knew Sophia could hear her. A flower from the garden discreetly placed on the snack tray. A colored pencil forgotten on the dresser during cleaning. And then came the first signs of a response. Longer gazes, a slight curve of the lips that could have been the beginning of a smile. Edward remained a ghostly presence in the house. Deborah saw him only occasionally, always looking tired and distant. One morning, as she was cleaning the staircase railing, he hurried past towards the door, talking on the phone about an important contract. For a brief moment, his eyes met Deborah's, and she saw something beyond the businessman. She saw a man lost in his own home. "Good morning, sir," Deborah said, unable to contain her boldness. Edward seemed momentarily surprised to be addressed, as if he weren't used to interacting with the staff. "Good morning," he replied automatically before continuing on his way. Deborah watched as he got into his luxury car and drove off. That man, who had built a technology empire, seemed completely oblivious to what was happening under his own roof, to his own daughter. The situation took a darker turn when Deborah, cleaning Bianca's office during her absence, found a small medicine bottle that had fallen behind the desk. The label indicated a potent sedative prescribed for Sophia. The dosage was much higher than would be appropriate for a child of her age and weight. Next to it was an open planner with notes on behavior and medication adjustments. Deborah discreetly took a photo of the bottle and the planner with her phone. She didn't know exactly what to do with the information, but her instinct told her she needed to document what she found. The following week, Bianca announced she would be traveling to New York for a charity event. Edward will be in Washington, D.C. for a meeting with the department. The house must be spotless for when we return. And remember, Sophia's routine must not be altered under any circumstances. With Bianca out of the house and only Rebecca and Mrs. Peterson as supervisors, Deborah saw an opportunity for more direct action. During her cleaning time in Sophia's room, while Rebecca was on a call in the hallway, Deborah approached the girl. "Hi, Sophia," she whispered, kneeling to be at the child's eye level. "Do you like to draw?" To her surprise, Sophia nodded slightly, an almost imperceptible but definitely conscious gesture. "I used to love drawing when I was a teacher. I'm sure you're a very good artist." Another subtle nod, and then, to Deborah's astonishment, Sophia raised her hand and pointed to her dresser drawer. Deborah quickly opened it and found several hidden drawings, all similar to the one she had seen before. Solitary figures, dark colors, the same blonde figure with red eyes. "Can I take one?" Deborah asked, hearing Rebecca's footsteps approaching. Sophia picked up one of the drawings and handed it to Deborah, who quickly hid it in her uniform pocket seconds before Rebecca returned to the room. That night, in her apartment, Deborah examined the drawing. On the back there was something she hadn't noticed, clumsy but legible letters, SOS. A 7-year-old child with Down syndrome, supposedly incapable of meaningful communication, had written a cry for help on her drawing. Deborah felt tears well up in her eyes. Sophia wasn't incapable. She was being deliberately silenced. The next day, while cleaning the backyard, Deborah discovered a small building separate from the main house, a studio. As Mrs. Peterson later explained, that had belonged to Helen, Sophia's mother. Mrs. Helen loved to paint. Mrs. Peterson commented in a rare moment of openness. She spent hours in there, especially with Sophia. The girl inherited her mother's talent. "And no one uses the studio anymore?" Deborah asked casually. "Not since what happened to Mrs. Helen. Mrs. Bianca keeps it locked, says it holds too many memories." Deborah nodded, but an idea began to form in her mind. If that space was so special to Helen and Sophia, perhaps it held answers. That same afternoon, taking advantage of a moment when Bianca was on the phone and the other staff were busy. Deborah got the key to the studio from Mrs. Peterson, using the pretext of needing to check for a possible leak she had noticed. The studio was a bright space with large windows overlooking the garden. Shelves with painting supplies, unfinished canvases and photographs on the walls, the only photos Deborah had seen on the property. Images of Helen, a woman with a warm smile and kind eyes, almost always with Sophia by her side. In one of the photos, Edward also appeared with a relaxed expression that contrasted sharply with the tense figure Deborah knew. In a corner, she found a small desk. Inside a drawer was a blue leather-bound notebook. Opening it, Deborah discovered it was Helen's personal diary. She began to flip through it quickly, aware that she needed to get out of there soon. The first entries spoke of the joy of Sophia's birth, the Down syndrome diagnosis, and the determination to give her daughter the best life possible. There were accounts of the girl's progress, her first steps, her first words. Sophia was not the non-communicative child Bianca described. She spoke, interacted, learned. As she progressed through the diary, Deborah found more worrying entries. Helen wrote about hiring Bianca as Edward's personal assistant, about her growing influence over him, about subtle attempts to take control of Sophia's routine. Bianca insists that Sophia needs more structure, more medication, Helen wrote in an entry dated a few months before her death. She says she's doing it for her own good. But I see the way she looks at my daughter, as if she's an obstacle to be removed. And then, on the last page of the diary, an entry that made Deborah's blood run cold. Something is wrong. I've been having dizzy spells, fainting. The doctors say it's stress, but I suspect something more. Edward doesn't notice, completely absorbed in his work. Bianca is always around when I feel unwell, always helpful, always with a tea, a remedy. Today I found something strange in my vitamin supplement. If something happens to me, I hope someone sees Sophia for who she deserves to be seen as. Loved, capable, special. Deborah closed the diary with trembling hands. It was a direct accusation, even if not explicit. Did Helen suspect she was being poisoned? And by Bianca? The sound of an approaching car brought her back to reality. She put the diary back where she found it, locked the studio and quickly left through the back, her heart racing. When she reached the main house, she saw that Bianca had returned earlier than expected from her appointment. "Where were you?" Bianca asked, her green eyes examining Deborah with suspicion. "Checking for a possible leak in the back wall, ma'am," Deborah replied, keeping her voice steady despite her nervousness. "With the recent rains, I thought it best to inspect." Bianca studied her for a moment before nodding slightly. "Very well. Prepare tea and bring it to my office. I have work to do." As she prepared the tea, Deborah realized she had crossed a line of no return. What she had discovered was too serious to ignore, but also too dangerous to confront directly. She needed help and a plan. Sophia needed her. And, who knows, maybe Edward also needed to open his eyes to what was happening right under his nose, in the fortress of silence he called home. The next morning, Deborah woke up with a clear resolution. She couldn't face this situation alone. She needed someone with knowledge and authority. She remembered Jessica, her old college friend from her education program, who now worked as a social worker for Child Protective Services. If anyone could help her understand the complexity of the situation and devise a safe plan, it was her. During her lunch break, Deborah met Jessica at a small diner near the city center. The noisy place offered the perfect anonymity for a delicate conversation. "My God. Deborah, this is very serious," Jessica said after hearing the whole story, her professional expression momentarily replaced by genuine shock. "Do you have any concrete proof besides the diary?" Deborah showed her the photos she had discreetly taken, the medicine bottle with the inappropriate dosage, Sophia's drawing with the cry for help, Bianca's notes about increasing sedation. "This all suggests neglect and possible abuse," Jessica said, analyzing the images. "But confronting people like the Millers isn't simple. Edward has powerful connections, and his wife, from what you describe, seems very astute. We need more evidence, systematic documentation. How do I do that without raising suspicion? Start a detailed journal, dates, times, specific observations. Take photos whenever possible discreetly. Record conversations if it's safe. We need to establish a pattern of behavior, not just isolated incidents. Jessica paused, taking a sip of her coffee. And what about the child? Is Sophia in immediate danger? We need to assess if an emergency intervention is necessary. Deborah considered the question carefully. I don't believe she's in immediate physical danger. She's being over-medicated and isolated, but I haven't seen signs of physical violence. My fear is what could happen in the long term, especially considering what Helen wrote in her diary. Then we have time to build a solid case. I'll discreetly research Edward Miller, Bianca, and their history. In the meantime, keep observing and documenting. But Deborah, Jessica held her hand firmly, be extremely careful. People with this kind of power and these secrets can be dangerous when cornered. In the days that followed, Deborah implemented a meticulous strategy. She bought a small notebook that she kept hidden in her apartment, where she documented everything: Sophia's medication schedules, the girl's behavior before and after taking the medicine, suspicious conversations between Bianca and the nurse Rebecca, any sign of consciousness and communication from Sophia that contradicted the official narrative that she was practically non-verbal and disconnected. In parallel, Deborah began to establish silent communication with Sophia. During the room cleanings, when she could be alone with the girl for a few minutes, she would whisper words of encouragement, ask how she was feeling, and leave small hidden gifts: a piece of candy, a colored ribbon, drawing materials. Gradually, Sophia began to respond, first with looks, then with subtle gestures, and eventually with whispered words. Hi, thank you, drawing. Simple words that completely contradicted the image of a child incapable of meaningful interaction. On a particularly hot afternoon, while cleaning Sophia's room during Rebecca's coffee break, Deborah sat next to the girl. Sophia, do you like living here? She asked softly. The girl looked at the door, checking if they were alone, and then shook her head no. Why? Can you tell me? Deborah insisted gently. Bad medicine. Makes me sleep too much, Sophia replied in a low but clear voice. I want sun. I want to paint. Those few words, spoken with some difficulty but with undeniable intent, confirmed all of Deborah's suspicions. Sophia was not incapable. She was being deliberately kept in a state of sedation and isolation. Do you see your father? Deborah asked, taking advantage of the rare moment of privacy. Sophia shook her head again. Dad works. Bianca says Dad is busy. And before? When your mother was here? Sophia's eyes lit up briefly before darkening with sadness. Mommy painted with me. Daddy smiled. Then Mommy got sick. Very sick. She paused, and then added in a confused tone, Bianca gave Mommy medicine too. Deborah felt a chill run down her spine. That innocent phrase confirmed the suspicions in Helen's diary. She was about to ask another question when she heard footsteps in the hallway. She quickly went back to cleaning the shelves, while Sophia resumed her usual posture of apparent apathy. Rebecca entered the room with a tray containing a glass of juice and a few pills. Time for your medicine, Sophia, she announced in a mechanical tone. She looked at Deborah with slight suspicion. Are you done in here? Almost just the windows left, Deborah replied casually, avoiding looking directly at Sophia. As she finished cleaning, she watched out of the corner of her eye as Rebecca administered the pills to the girl, practically forcing her to swallow them, followed by the juice. Within minutes, Sophia's eyes began to get heavy, her small body relaxing in the chair like a puppet with its strings cut. That sight strengthened Deborah's resolve. That night, she sent all the new evidence to Jessica, including a detailed account of her conversation with Sophia. This is exactly what we need, Jessica replied via text. I'm building a file. I found out some interesting things about Bianca. She had a previous relationship with an elderly businessman who died under questionable circumstances. There was no investigation at the time, as it was attributed to natural causes. And guess what? She was the main beneficiary of his will. Jessica's next message made Deborah freeze. I also found out that Bianca has been in contact with a psychiatric clinic in Atlanta. From what I could gather, it seems there are plans to have Sophia committed there. We need to act before that happens. The next morning, Deborah arrived at the mansion with a sense of urgency pulsing in her chest. The house was unusually quiet, even for its usual standards. Mrs. Peterson, usually the first to arrive, had not yet appeared. In the kitchen, she found only the gardener, Mr. Johnson, making coffee. "Where is everyone?" Deborah asked, trying to sound casual. "The boss gave most of the staff the day off today, said she's having an important meeting here and wants privacy." "It's just me, you and the nurse," Mr. Johnson replied, visibly uncomfortable with the unusual situation. Something in the gardener's expression made Deborah uneasy. "Did something happen, Mr. Johnson?" The man looked around, making sure they were alone, and lowered his voice. "Last night, after everyone left, a car arrived. I saw two men talking to Mrs. Bianca in the garden. They were talking about a transfer and procedures, and I heard the girl's name, Sophia." Deborah's heart raced. The commitment plans were moving faster than they had imagined. "Do you know if Mr. Miller is home?" she asked urgently. "He got back late from D.C. last night. He should still be in the master bedroom." Deborah needed to act fast. If Bianca was accelerating her plans, perhaps it was time for a more direct approach. Edward needed to know what was happening to his daughter before it was too late. She went up the stairs with the excuse of cleaning the upstairs bathrooms. In the hallway, she saw Rebecca leaving Sophia's room with a tense expression. "Good morning," Deborah greeted. "Is Sophia okay today?" "She's resting," Rebecca replied curtly. "Mrs. Bianca asked not to be disturbed today. That goes for the girls' room, too." As soon as Rebecca went downstairs, Deborah silently approached the door to Sophia's room. She heard no sound coming from inside. She slowly turned the doorknob, but it was locked, something that had never happened before. Her instinct told her something was wrong. Very wrong. She walked down the hall until she heard voices coming from Bianca's office. The door was ajar and Deborah positioned herself discreetly to listen. "Everything's ready for tomorrow," Bianca was saying to someone on the phone. "The clinic confirmed they have a bed reserved. The documents are already signed. Guess I used the power of attorney I have in Edward's name. He doesn't even need to know the details, just that it will be the best for Sophia. No, he won't ask questions. He never does." There was a pause, and then Bianca continued, her voice now lower and more calculated. "After the commitment, the next step will be to have her legally declared incompetent. Yes, with the psychiatric report we arranged, it won't be difficult. Edward is so busy with the company, he barely notices what happens here. When we're done, I'll have full access to the girl's trust fund." Deborah felt her blood run cold. It wasn't just isolation or neglect. It was a calculated plan to take control of Sophia's assets, likely left by Helen. She moved away from the door silently, her mind working furiously. She needed to talk to Edward immediately, show him the evidence, make him see what was happening under his own roof. But how could she approach him without alerting Bianca? The opportunity came almost an hour later, when Deborah saw Edward leaving his room, dressed in an impeccable suit, clearly preparing to leave. "Mr. Miller," Deborah called out, mustering all her courage, "may I speak with you for a minute?" "It's about Sophia." Edward stopped, surprised to be approached directly by an employee. His face showed first irritation, then curiosity. "What about my daughter?" he asked, his voice low and tense. "It's important, sir, and urgent. Please." Something in Deborah's intensity must have communicated the seriousness of the situation, because Edward, after a moment's hesitation, gestured for her to follow him into his private office, a room rarely used since he started working mostly outside the home. Once inside, with the door closed, Deborah spoke quickly, aware that she had only a few minutes. "Your daughter is being over-medicated, isolated without medical necessity. And now there are plans to have her committed to a psychiatric clinic without your real knowledge of the facts." Edward looked at her as if she had lost her mind. "What are you talking about?" "Sophia receives special care following medical recommendations. Bianca supervises everything personally. Sir, with all due respect, have you seen your daughter recently? Have you talked to her? Do you know what medication she takes and in what dosage?" The question seemed to hit Edward like a physical blow. He hesitated, and in that hesitation Deborah saw the answer. No, he didn't know. He had completely delegated his daughter's care to his wife, immersing himself in his work as a way to escape the pain and responsibilities. "I have evidence," Deborah continued, taking her phone out of her pocket. "Photos of the medications with dosages incompatible with Sophia's age and weight. Notes from your wife about deliberate increases in sedation. And most importantly," here she paused, measuring the impact of her next words, "I found Helen's diary in the studio. The last entries, you should read them." Edward turned pale at the mention of his first wife's name. For a moment, Deborah feared he would fire her on the spot or worse. But then something changed. In his eyes, a flicker of doubt, perhaps even fear. "Show me," he said finally, holding out his hand for Deborah's phone. She swiped through the photos slowly, explaining each one, connecting the dots. Edward remained silent, his face hardening with each new image. When they got to the photo of the last entry in Helen's diary, he asked to read it again, his eyes fixed on his deceased wife's words. This is very serious," he said at last, his voice almost a whisper. "But I need to see my daughter before I draw any conclusions. Now." They left the office and quickly went up the stairs toward Sophia's room. In the hallway they found Bianca, who seemed momentarily taken aback to see Edward accompanied by Deborah. "Edward, darling, I thought you had already left for your meeting," she said, quickly regaining her composure. "Is there a problem?" "I want to see Sophia," he replied curtly, continuing toward his daughter's room. "She's resting now, love. It's not good to disturb her routine. You know how agitated she gets with changes," Bianca said, subtly placing herself between Edward and the bedroom door. "Besides, don't you have that video conference with the Japanese in half an hour?" "The meeting can wait." "I want to see my daughter now, Bianca," Edward insisted, his voice now carrying an authority Deborah had never witnessed before. Bianca shot a cold glare at Deborah, instantly understanding that something had changed. "Of course, darling. But perhaps we should do this in private without—" She gestured toward Deborah with a flick of her head. "Deborah is coming with me," Edward declared, to the surprise of both women. When they reached the bedroom door, they found it locked. Bianca took a key from the pocket of her tailored coat and opened the door with visible reluctance. The room was dark, the curtains drawn despite the sunny day outside. Sophia was lying in her bed, apparently asleep. Edward approached quickly, kneeling beside his daughter. He watched her for long moments, noticing her deep, slow breathing, the unnatural stillness of her small body. "Sophia," he called softly, touching her shoulder. "Sophia, honey, it's Daddy." The girl didn't respond, not even a stir. Edward looked at the nightstand, where several medicine bottles were arranged in a row. "What are all these medicines?" he asked, picking up the bottles to examine them. "They're medical prescriptions, Edward," Bianca answered impatiently, "all recommended by Dr. Williams to keep Sophia's condition stable." "Dr. Williams?" Edward frowned. "I thought her doctor was Dr. Clark, the pediatric neurologist." A tense silence filled the room. It was Deborah who finally spoke. "Mr. Miller, I believe your daughter is being deliberately sedated. Look at the date of the last prescription for this medication." She pointed to one of the bottles, "and compare it with the amount remaining. The dosage is far above what's recommended for a child her size." Edward examined the medications, his expression gradually turning to horror. He turned to Bianca, who maintained a facade of calm, though her eyes betrayed growing nervousness. "What have you done, Bianca?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm taking care of her, Edward, as I always have since Helen left us. Sophia needs structure, control. The doctors agree that—" "Which doctors? Show me the reports, the original prescriptions." Bianca hesitated, her gaze quickly calculating the available options. Finally, she said, "They're in my office. Let's go there and I'll show you everything." "It's not appropriate to discuss this in front of employees." Edward looked at Sophia again, gently touching her face. Something in his expression broke. The painful recognition of a father realizing he had failed his daughter profoundly. "Deborah, stay with Sophia," he instructed. "I'm going to check these documents with Bianca and I'll be right back." As soon as they left the room, Deborah approached Sophia, checking her pulse, her breathing. The girl seemed deeply sedated but stable. On her wrist, Deborah noticed faint marks as if she had been held tightly recently. She took out her phone and sent a quick message to Jessica. "Spoke with Edward. He's checking the evidence now. Sophia is heavily sedated. I'm afraid of what Bianca might do when cornered." The reply came almost immediately. "Don't leave her alone with the girl. I'm on my way with colleagues from CPS. If the situation escalates, I call the police." The minutes dragged on as Deborah stayed by Sophia's side, holding her small hand, whispering words of comfort without knowing if the girl could hear her. From time to time she heard raised voices from downstairs, Edward and Bianca arguing, though the exact words were indistinguishable. Sophia stirred slightly, her eyes opening for an instant. She recognized Deborah and tried to say something, but her voice was just an inaudible murmur before her heavy eyelids closed again. The bedroom door opened abruptly, and Bianca entered alone, her usually composed face now marked by anger. "Get out now," she ordered Deborah, her voice trembling slightly. "You're fired. Get out of my house immediately." Deborah remained where she was by Sophia's bed. "Where is Mr. Miller?" "That's none of your business. You have 1 minute to leave before I call the community security." "I'm not leaving Sophia," Deborah declared firmly. "Not until I'm sure she's safe." Bianca's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. An unqualified housemaid from the suburbs against Edward Miller's wife. Who do you think the authorities will listen to?" "The authorities will listen to the evidence," Deborah replied, maintaining her calm despite her racing heart. "And the evidence shows that you have been deliberately keeping Sophia sedated and isolated, with plans to have her committed without the father's informed consent." Bianca took a step forward, her composure visibly crumbling. "You don't understand. Sophia has never been anything but an obstacle. Edward drowned himself in work after Helen's death, and I managed everything. The house, the social affairs, the family's reputation. That girl is just a constant reminder of Helen, consuming resources and attention that should be directed toward more important things." "You talk about her as if she's an object," Deborah said, horrified by Bianca's coldness. "She's a child. Fair person. She's a liability, a disabled child who will never—" Bianca cut herself off, realizing she had said too much. At that moment the door opened again, and Edward entered, his face pale, holding some papers. Behind him, to Deborah's surprise, was Jessica, accompanied by another man in a suit whom she didn't recognize. "I heard everything." "Bianca," Edward said, his voice laced with a contained anger that seemed more dangerous than any shout. "I found the clinic documents in your office. You were planning to commit my daughter to a psychiatric institution using a power of attorney I signed for business matters." Bianca backed away, her expression rapidly shifting between defiance and calculation. "You never really cared about her, Edward. You buried yourself in work and left me to handle everything. Now you want to play the dedicated father." "You're right," Edward admitted, surprising everyone. "I failed as a father. I distanced myself when Sophia needed me most after we lost Helen, but that ends now." He turned to Jessica and the unknown man. "This is Jessica Rodriguez from Child Protective Services, and this is Dr. Paul Mason, a pediatric neurologist I've asked to examine Sophia immediately." Bianca turned pale. "But you can't bring strangers into our home without my consent. I am Edward's wife and I have rights." "What you don't have is the right to improperly medicate my daughter or plan her commitment without real medical need," Edward retorted. "Dr. Mason will examine Sophia now, and Ms. Rodriguez is here to ensure Sophia's rights as a child are protected." Jessica stepped forward. "Mrs. Miller, we have sufficient evidence to open a formal investigation into possible neglect and abuse. We suggest you cooperate fully." The doctor had already approached Sophia, examining the medicine bottles with a grave expression, checking her vital signs and pupillary response. "This child is heavily sedated," he declared after a few minutes. "The combination and dosage of these medications are inappropriate and potentially dangerous. I recommend immediate supervised reduction of the medication, followed by a full evaluation once she is more conscious." Bianca seemed cornered, looking from one face to another, weighing her options. Finally, her eyes settled on Edward. "You'll regret this, Edward. I managed your life while you hid in your work. I was the one who maintained your public image, who organized your social engagements, who turned this house into something presentable. And apparently, you were also the one who planned to seize the trust fund Helen left for Sophia," Edward replied coldly. "I found the transfer documents on your desk, already signed with my forged signature." The shock of that revelation seemed to silence Bianca momentarily. She looked at Sophia, at the doctor examining her, at Jessica with her notepad, and finally at Deborah, the housemaid who had dismantled her entire carefully constructed plan. "This isn't over," she said at last, her voice low and threatening. "You have no idea what I can do, Edward." With that, she turned on her heel and left the room, the sound of her heels echoing down the hallway. Edward approached the bed, kneeling beside his daughter. For the first time since Deborah had known him, she saw genuine emotion on his face, pain, regret, determination. "What happens now?" he asked, looking at Jessica and the doctor. "First, we'll stabilize Sophia and gradually reduce the medication," Dr. Mason replied. "Then a complete evaluation by a multidisciplinary team to determine her real needs and abilities, without the influence of excessive sedation." "And what about Bianca?" Deborah asked, concerned by the threatening tone of her last words. "I recommend immediate protective measures," Jessica said. "Given the evidence and the nature of the threats, we have grounds to request a legal restraining order from the home. We also need to investigate the circumstances of Helen's death more deeply, considering the suspicions documented in her diary." Edward ran a hand through his hair, visibly shaken. "I should have seen what was happening. How could I have been so blind?" "The important thing is that you see it now," Deborah said softly. "Sophia needs her father." As if responding to the sound of her name, Sophia stirred again, her eyes briefly opening. This time they focused on Edward, and something like recognition shone in them before they closed again. "I'm here, honey," Edward whispered, holding Sophia's small hand. "Daddy's here now, and I'm not going anywhere." As the doctor continued his examination and Jessica made notes for her report, Deborah watched the scene with a mixture of relief and apprehension. The initial battle had been won. Sophia would be protected, the truth was coming to light. But Bianca's look as she left the room suggested the war was just beginning. In the following weeks, the Miller mansion underwent a gradual but profound transformation. The perpetually closed curtains now allowed sunlight to flood in. The oppressive silence gave way to sounds of life, soft music, conversations, and occasionally Sophia's shy laughter. The fortress of isolation was slowly beginning to feel like a home. Edward had taken a temporary leave of absence from his company to devote himself entirely to Sophia's recovery and the reorganization of his family. The transition was not easy. Years of emotional neglect could not be erased overnight. And the absence of Bianca, who had moved into an apartment in downtown Miami after a court-ordered restraining order, left an administrative void that Edward struggled to fill. Sophia, meanwhile, was undergoing a delicate, supervised detoxification process. The gradual reduction of her medications, led by a specialized medical team, revealed a very different child from the one Deborah had first met. As the fog of sedation lifted, an alert, expressive, and surprisingly communicative girl emerged. "Look, Daddy, I made a son," Sophia exclaimed one morning, proudly showing her colorful drawing to Edward, who was working on his laptop on the veranda. The entrepreneur looked at his daughter with a mixture of wonder and pain. In just 3 weeks without the excessive medication, Sophia was demonstrating skills he didn't even know she possessed. "It's beautiful, Princess," he replied, pulling her into a hug. "Do you want to hang it on the living room wall?" Sophia nodded enthusiastically, her eyes shining with the simple joy of having her work valued. Deborah, watching the scene from the veranda entrance, felt a wave of emotion. She had been invited to stay at the house, no longer as a maid, but as Sophia's therapeutic companion, a suggestion from the multidisciplinary team now regularly attending to the girl. Her background as a teacher and the bond she had already established with Sophia made her the ideal candidate for the role. "Deborah, look at my son." Sophia held the drawing out to her, seeking approval. "It's wonderful, Sophia. I love how you use so many different colors," Deborah replied, kneeling to be at the girl's level. Edward cast a grateful look at Deborah, one of those looks that had become frequent in recent weeks. The relationship between them had evolved into something indefinable. They were not exactly friends, nor merely employer and employee, but allies united for Sophia's well-being. "Dr. Matthew will be here in half an hour for the therapy session," Deborah reminded them. "Do you want to get ready, Sophia?" The girl nodded and ran inside, her light footsteps echoing through the house in a way that would have been unthinkable weeks before. When they were alone, Edward closed his laptop and sighed deeply. "I still can't believe how much time I lost," he said. looking at the chair where Sophia had been sitting. "She's incredible, Deborah. Smart, affectionate, full of life. And I almost let—" Deborah sat in the chair next to him. "The important thing is that you're here now. Sophia has an impressive capacity for recovery and love to give. Focus on that, not the past." Edward nodded, but his expression remained shadowed. "I heard from the lawyer this morning. Bianca is contesting the restraining order and has filed for an early division of assets. Does she have a chance?" "Not regarding Sophia, thanks to the medical reports and the testimony from Child Protective Services. But as for the assets, the marriage was real, legally speaking. She has rights." Deborah sensed there was more to it, something he wasn't saying. "Something else is worrying you, isn't it?" Edward hesitated, as if weighing how much he could share. "Bianca knows a lot of details about my business. Government contracts, confidential proposals, company vulnerabilities. I'm afraid she might use that information as a bargaining chip, or worse, as a form of revenge." The silence that followed was heavy. They both knew Bianca was not an adversary to be underestimated. "And there's something else," Edward added, his voice almost a whisper. "The investigation into Helen's death has been reopened. The police are reviewing the original medical reports, looking for evidence of gradual poisoning." Deborah felt a chill. Helen's diary, with its suspicions about the teas and remedies Bianca offered her, had led the authorities to question the original narrative of death by natural causes. "Do you think she really—" Deborah couldn't finish the question. "I don't know," Edward answered honestly. "I don't want to believe it. But after discovering what she was doing to Sophia, what she was planning to do, I don't know what to think anymore." The sound of the intercom interrupted their conversation. Dr. Matthew, Sophia's occupational therapist, had arrived. Edward quickly composed himself, resuming the posture of a present and engaged father he had been building day by day. The therapy session was productive, as always. Sophia flourished under specialized positive attention, demonstrating motor, cognitive, and social skills that surprised even the most experienced professionals. The latest report described her as a child with Down syndrome who, far from presenting severe impairment, as initially reported, demonstrates development consistent with her condition when properly stimulated. After the session, while Sophia rested in her room, now decorated with her own colorful art and educational toys, Deborah received a call from Jessica. "We have a problem," the social worker said without preamble. "Bianca has scheduled a press conference for tomorrow. From what we've gathered, she intends to present herself as the victim of a conspiracy to remove her from the family." "A conspiracy? That's absurd! We have evidence, medical reports, Helen's diary." "Yes, but she has influence and a powerful narrative. The dedicated stepmother, unjustly removed from her home by a vengeful maid who manipulated an emotionally absent father. And she's implying that you and Edward have a personal involvement." Deborah felt her face burn. "That's completely false. I know, but it's a difficult accusation to refute completely, especially considering you now live in the house and have a close relationship with the family. We need to be prepared." When she hung up, Deborah stood motionless for a few moments, trying to process the information. The idea of her character and intentions being publicly questioned hit her like a physical blow. All she had done was try to protect a vulnerable child, and now she could be portrayed as an opportunist. She decided Edward needed to know immediately. She found him in his office, on the phone with his lawyer. From his grim expression, she realized he was already aware of the situation. "I just spoke with Jessica," she said, as soon as he hung up. "Her about tomorrow's press conference." Edward nodded gravely. "My lawyer just informed me. Bianca has garnered support from some influential figures in Miami society, people who have only seen her at charity events, always smiling and seemingly dedicated to social causes." "What are we going to do?" Edward noticed the "we" in her question, her natural inclusion in the family's decisions, but didn't comment. Instead, he answered with determination, "We will not let her control the narrative. I've spoken with my press officer. We will give our own interview, presenting the facts and the medical evidence. No personal attacks, just the truth. Do you think it will be enough?" "Honestly, I don't know. But I can't let Bianca manipulate public opinion, or worse, create a hostile environment for Sophia." He paused, hesitant. "Deborah, I would completely understand if you'd prefer to step away for a while. This is going to get ugly, and your name will certainly be dragged through the mud." Deborah squared her shoulders, a firm resolve forming within her. "I'm not going anywhere. Sophia needs stability now more than ever. And I have nothing to hide or fear." The look of gratitude and admiration Edward gave her made her heart race in a way she chose not to analyze at that moment. The next morning, as predicted, Bianca was all over the main local news portals, impeccably dressed, in a light pink suit that made her look fragile and innocent. With carefully controlled tears glistening in her eyes, she painted a moving picture of betrayal and injustice. "I dedicated 3 years of my life to creating a safe and structured environment for Sophia, strictly following medical advice," she declared, her voice calculatedly trembling. "Now I am removed from my own home based on baseless accusations from an unqualified employee who, conveniently, has taken my place in the house." The insinuations about the relationship between Deborah and Edward were made with venomous subtlety, never directly stated but clearly implied. The audience of journalists absorbed every word, and social media was already exploding with divided opinions and speculation. In the mansion, the atmosphere was one of controlled tension. Edward had spent the morning in meetings with his legal and public relations team, preparing for his own press statement, scheduled for early afternoon. Sophia, oblivious to the storm brewing around her, played peacefully in the garden under the watchful eye of Mrs. Peterson. Deborah tried to stay calm, but every notification on her phone brought new messages from concerned friends or, worse, screenshots of malicious comments on social media. Her name was being associated with terms like gold digger, homewrecker, and other even crueler characterizations. "Don't read that," advised Jessica, who had arrived to offer support. "It's exactly what Bianca wants, to destabilize you, to make you doubt yourself. It's hard to ignore when everyone is talking about you, creating stories that have nothing to do with reality," Deborah replied, turning off her phone in frustration. "Remember what matters. Sophia is safe. She's receiving the proper treatment, and you did the right thing. The people who know you know the truth." Edward's press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. at his company headquarters. Deborah would not be physically present, a strategic decision to avoid fueling speculation, but she would watch the online broadcast. As the time approached, Deborah found herself inexplicably nervous. There was so much at stake, not just her reputation, but Sophia's future and Edward's ability to legally protect her. Edward appeared on the screen exactly at 2 o'clock, flanked by his lawyer and a doctor, Deborah recognized as part of the multidisciplinary team attending to Sophia. His expression was serious but composed. Wearing a simple dark suit without any ostentation, he looked the opposite of Bianca's carefully constructed presentation. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began, his voice firm. "I am here today to clarify the facts about a painful and delicate situation involving the well-being of my daughter, Sophia. First and foremost, I ask that you respect her privacy, a 7-year-old child who has already been through enough trials." With clinical precision, Edward presented the facts, the medical reports proving the excessive and inappropriate medication, the reports from Child Protective Services documenting the unjustified isolation. The documents found that revealed plans for Sophia's involuntary commitment. He did not mention Helen's diary or the suspicions about her death, matters that remained under police investigation. When he addressed Deborah's role in the situation, his tone became even more serious. Ms. Deborah Smith acted with courage and ethics by identifying a risk situation and seeking appropriate professional help. Her training as an educator enabled her to recognize signs that many, including myself, failed to see. The allegations of any improper relationship between us are categorically false and represent an attempt to divert attention from the real issue, Sophia's well-being. At the end of the presentation, the doctor present, Dr. Richard Allen, a pediatric neurologist, offered his professional testimony on Sophia's current condition and the harm caused by the previous treatment. "We are observing a remarkable recovery since the medication regimen was appropriately adjusted," the specialist explained. "Sophia exhibits cognitive, social, and motor skills typical of a child with Down syndrome who is properly stimulated. a far cry from the almost catatonic state in which we initially found her. The journalist's questions were intense, some clearly influenced by Bianca's narrative, but Edward remained firm and factual. When asked about Bianca's possible motives for Sophia's inadequate treatment, he replied simply, "I cannot and will not speculate on motivations. The facts and medical evidence speak for themselves. My only focus now is to ensure that my daughter receives the care and love she deserves." When the broadcast ended, Deborah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Edward had been dignified, factual, and convincing. But the battle for public opinion was just beginning, and Bianca would certainly not back down easily. The following hours confirmed her fears. The internet was buzzing with polarized opinions, and some sensationalist outlets were already proclaiming that the Miller case promised to be the high society scandal of the year in Florida. In the late afternoon, Edward returned to the mansion, visibly exhausted. He found Deborah and Sophia in the living room, putting together a puzzle. "How did it go?" Deborah asked in a low voice, while Sophia was distracted by the colorful pieces. "As well as it could have under the circumstances," he replied, loosening his tie. "My advisor says the reaction is divided, but the medical facts are weighing in our favor." He knelt beside Sophia, kissing the top of her head. "Hi, Princess. That looks fun. Can I help?" Sophia smiled, handing him a piece. For a few moments, the day's tension seemed to dissipate as the three of them worked together on the puzzle, creating a small bubble of normalcy amidst the chaos. Edward's phone interrupted that peaceful moment. He answered with an expression that quickly turned to alarm. "When?" he asked, standing up and moving into the hallway. "Are you sure?" "Yes, I understand. We'll be prepared." When he returned, his face had regained its former tension. "What happened?" Deborah asked. Edward looked at Sophia, still engrossed in the puzzle, and made a gesture indicating they would talk later. Deborah nodded, understanding. It was only after dinner, when Sophia was put to bed, that Edward explained the situation. "That was my lawyer. Bianca got court authorization to visit Sophia." "What? How is that possible? After everything we've discovered?" The judge considered that, without a definitive ruling on the accusations, there is no legal basis to completely prevent contact between a stepmother and stepdaughter. "The visits will be supervised by a court officer, of course, but it's dangerous," Deborah completed. "Sophia has just started to recover. Seeing Bianca now could be traumatic." Edward nodded gravely. "Exactly. We are appealing the decision, but the first visit is scheduled for Saturday." He sighed deeply. 3 days from today. What can we do to prepare Sophia?" Dr. Matthews suggested we explain it simply and directly, without creating unnecessary anxiety. He will be present during the visit, as will a child psychologist. The worry was evident in every line of Edward's face. Deborah resisted the urge to touch his arm in comfort, a gesture that could easily be misinterpreted by any observer, especially now. "Sophia is stronger than we think," she said instead. "She's been through so much and still manages to smile, play, and trust. We'll be by her side every step of the way." Edward nodded, grateful for the strength he found in Deborah when his own spirits faltered. This woman who had entered his home as an employee had, in such a short time, become a fundamental pillar in the rebuilding of his family. The news that arrived the next morning, however, shook even Deborah's composure. Jessica showed up at the mansion unannounced, her expression worried. "We need to talk," she said as soon as she was let in. In private, Edward led the two women to the office, closing the door to ensure privacy. "What happened?" he asked, tension evident in his voice. "The police found evidence in Bianca's apartment," Jessica explained. "Forged medical documents, blank prescription pads signed by a doctor who was being investigated for selling prescriptions, and," she hesitated, looking from Edward to Deborah, "a diary detailing plans to gain total control over the Miller family's assets." "That's no surprise," Edward commented grimly. "We already knew she was planning to take over Sophia's trust fund." "That's not all," Jessica continued. "There are specific entries about Helen, methods, dosages, timelines. The police are now treating it as a homicide investigation." A heavy silence fell over the room. The suspicion that had loomed like a shadow now took on concrete, horribly real contours. "Bianca has been detained for questioning," Jessica concluded. But her lawyer is already working to get her released. The problem is, if she gets out, Sophia, Deborah whispered, understanding immediately. If Bianca finds out there's such concrete evidence against her. She'll have nothing to lose, Edward completed, his face pale with the realization. And she still has a legal right to a supervised visit. That's exactly why I came in person, Jessica said. Child Protective Services is requesting an emergency protective order to suspend any visits until the criminal investigation progresses, but we don't know if it will be granted in time. Edward ran a hand over his face, exhaustion and fear evident in every gesture. What can we do? For now, increase security, and don't leave Sophia alone for a moment, Jessica replied, pragmatically. I've already contacted the judge responsible for the case, explaining the gravity of the situation. We expect an answer later today. After Jessica left, Edward and Deborah found themselves facing a reality even more complex than they had imagined. It wasn't just Sophia's present well-being at stake, it was her physical safety. I'm hiring additional security, Edward decided, already dialing his assistant, and postponing all my external meetings until further notice. Deborah nodded, her mind working furiously. Sophia shouldn't notice any of this. We need to keep her routine as normal as possible. Agreed. Not a word about Bianca or investigations, just silent protection. That night after Sophia was asleep, Edward invited Deborah for a conversation on the veranda. The Miami sky was exceptionally starry, the sea breeze bringing a slight relief from the day's heat. I wanted to thank you, he said, breaking the contemplative silence that had settled between them. Not just for discovering what was happening to Sophia, but for everything that came after. For staying, even when things got tough, for teaching me, a father who was absent for so long, how to truly be present for my daughter. Deborah felt a wave of emotion she couldn't quite name. Sophia's a wonderful child. Being with her isn't a sacrifice, it's a privilege. Even so, you risked a lot. Your reputation, your safety. And now, with all these absurd accusations from Bianca, I don't regret anything, Deborah affirmed with conviction. I would do it all over again. Their eyes met for a moment too long to be casual, charged with something unsaid, something they both silently agreed not to explore. Not yet. Not with so many battles still to face. The moment was interrupted by Edward's phone. It was his lawyer with urgent news. The judge had granted the protective order requested by Child Protective Services. Bianca's visits were suspended indefinitely, pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. An immense weight seemed to have been lifted from both their shoulders. Sophia would be safe, at least for now. This gives us time, Edward said, putting his phone away. Time to strengthen the case, to help Sophia recover completely, to... He didn't finish the sentence, but Deborah understood. Time to figure out what came next when the dust settled. For all the unasked questions that hung between them. What neither of them could have predicted, however, was that Bianca had one last desperate card up her sleeve. And she was about to play it. Saturday morning dawned with a deceptive tranquility. The Miami sky was a crystal-clear blue, and a gentle breeze swayed the palm fronds in the miller's garden. The protective order preventing Bianca's visit had brought a momentary relief, but both Edward and Deborah knew the battle was far from over. Sophia woke up excited, unaware of the storms brewing around her. Her progress in recent weeks had been remarkable. Her speech had become clearer and more frequent, her motor skills more refined, and her vibrant personality was emerging with increasing strength. We're making pancakes today, she announced cheerfully as she entered the kitchen, where Deborah and Edward were already having coffee. Excellent idea, Princess, Edward replied, pulling her onto his lap with a kiss on her forehead. Who will be our head chef? Me and Deborah, Sophia declared with conviction. You can be the helper. Edward feigned indignation, making Sophia laugh. Helper, me? It's because you burn everything, Daddy, Sophia explained with the direct sincerity typical of children, prompting a genuine laugh from Deborah. She's not wrong, Deborah commented, remembering Edward's disastrous attempt to make scrambled eggs the previous week. That domestic scene, father, daughter and Deborah laughing together in the sunlit kitchen, seemed so natural that it was easy to forget, for a moment, the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. The pancake preparation became a festive event, with Sophia proudly measuring ingredients under Deborah's gentle supervision, while Edward handled the simpler tasks, like washing dishes and cutting fruit for the topping. Edward's phone interrupted the culinary celebration. He looked at the caller ID and his expression subtly changed. "It's from the law firm," he said to Deborah. "I'll take it in the office." As Edward left, Deborah focused on keeping Sophia entertained, helping her draw smiley faces on the pancakes with chocolate syrup. "Deborah?" Sophia asked as they worked. "Yes, sweetie. Are you going to stay with us forever?" The question, asked with the disarming innocence of a child, caught Deborah by surprise. Her position in the Miller household had started as temporary, a practical solution during Sophia's transition and recovery. But as the weeks passed, the lines had blurred, creating something that increasingly resembled a family, unconventional but real. Deborah began, unsure how to answer honestly, without making promises she might not be able to keep. She was saved by Edward's return, his grave expression signaling important news. He made a discreet gesture indicating they would talk later. "Who's ready to try these works of art?" Edward asked, forcing enthusiasm into his voice as he sat at the table. Sophia didn't notice anything different, but Deborah knew Edward well enough by now to see the tension in his shoulders, the slight furrow of his brow that indicated worry. It was only after breakfast, when Sophia was entertained with an educational program in the living room, that Edward pulled Deborah into the hallway. "Bianca was released," he said in a low voice. "She posted bail last night." Deborah felt a chill. "But the protective order is still in effect, right?" "Yes, she can't come near Sophia or this house. But my lawyer is worried. Apparently Bianca gave interviews to some journalists right after she was released, claiming persecution and conspiracy. She still has supporters." "Unfortunately, yes. People who only know her superficially, who only see the carefully constructed image of the socialite, dedicated to charitable causes." Edward ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Deborah now recognized as a sign of deep concern. "The worst part is that she's saying she has bombshell evidence that will be revealed soon." "What kind of evidence could she have?" "We have medical reports. Her own diary incriminating her." "I don't know, but knowing Bianca, she wouldn't hesitate to fabricate evidence if necessary." The day passed with an underlying tension that both tried to hide from Sophia. The community's security had been reinforced, and a private guard was discreetly positioned near the main gate of the property. In the late afternoon, Jessica called with disturbing news. "Bianca is giving an exclusive live interview tonight," she informed them, "on Augustus Miller's show." Augustus Miller was known for his sensationalist program that often turned family dramas into public spectacles. His viewership was enormous, particularly among the working classes of Miami. "What does she hope to achieve with this?" Edward asked, frustrated. "What bombshell evidence could she have?" "We don't know for sure, but there are rumors she has recordings." "Our view of the house." Deborah and Edward exchanged alarmed glances. The idea that private conversations, family moments with Sophia could have been secretly recorded and would now be publicly exploited was disturbing. "Is that legal?" Deborah questioned. "Not necessarily, but the damage will be done once it airs," Jessica replied pragmatically. "We're trying to get an injunction to stop the broadcast. But time is short." The interview was scheduled for 8 p.m. At 7:30 p.m., with no news of an injunction, Edward and Deborah prepared for the worst. Sophia had been put to bed early with the excuse of a special outing planned for Sunday. Sitting side by side in the living room, they watched in tense silence as the show's intro began. Augustus Miller, with his characteristic theatrical style, announced the case that shook Miami's high society with dramatic flourishes, promising exclusive revelations that would change everything the public thought they knew. Bianca appeared on screen, strategically dressed in white, the color of innocence and purity. Her face showed subtle signs of stress, which, ironically, only enhanced her appearance as a vulnerable victim. "Mrs. Bianca Miller, thank you for your courage in coming forward to tell your side of this shocking story," Augustus began with false empathy. "I appreciate the opportunity." "Augustus," Bianca replied, her voice melodiously sad, "I never imagined that my life, dedicated to my family and social causes, could turn into this nightmare." The interview began with Bianca recounting her version of the facts, how she met Edward after Helen's tragic loss, how she lovingly took on the care of Sophia, a special child with complex needs, how she strictly followed medical advice to ensure her stepdaughter's well-being. Edward watched with a stone-faced expression, while Deborah fought against nausea at so many distortions. And then, Bianca continued, discreet tears now shining in her eyes, this employee, Deborah, began to get close to Edward. First subtly, then more and more openly. I realized what was happening, but I never imagined how far she would go to push me away and take my place. Do you have proof of these allegations? Augustus asked, leaning forward theatrically. I do, Augustus. Unfortunately, I was forced to install cameras in my own home when I started noticing strange behavior. What I discovered left me devastated. At that moment, Edward stood up abruptly. Cameras? She installed cameras in our house without my knowledge? That's an invasion of privacy, Deborah murmured, equally shocked. It must be illegal. On the screen, Bianca made a dramatic gesture, and the program showed what appeared to be a security video recording. It showed Deborah in Sophia's room, whispering something to the girl while Nurse Rebecca was distracted in the hallway. The scene, taken out of context and without audio, could easily be interpreted as suspicious. As you can see, Bianca narrated, she systematically isolated Sophia from her medical caregivers, whispering things we couldn't hear, creating a relationship of dependency and manipulation. The video switched to another scene, Deborah and Edward talking on the veranda at night, sitting close together. The camera, positioned at a specific angle, made it look like they were holding hands, although in reality, they were not. Meanwhile, her advances on my husband progressed, Bianca continued, from employee to confidant to something more, all orchestrated to replace me. Deborah covered her face with her hands, horrified. That's a complete distortion. That conversation was about Sophia's medical progress. Edward remained standing, rigidly controlled, but Deborah could see the contained fury in every line of his body. He picked up the phone, dialing his lawyer. We need to stop this now, he told the lawyer as soon as he answered. She's showing illegally obtained recordings from my house, completely distorting reality. On the screen, Bianca reached the climax of her performance. The most painful part was discovering they were planning to permanently remove me, using fabricated accusations about Sophia's medication. I have here, she presented some documents, the original report signed by respected specialists confirming that Sophia's treatment was perfectly appropriate for her condition. Forged documents, Edward growled into the phone. The same ones the police found in her apartment. The program was abruptly interrupted for a commercial break. Edward hung up the phone, his expression a mixture of fury and determination. The judge is issuing an emergency injunction right now, he informed Deborah. The program will not be able to show the rest of the interview or the illegally obtained recordings. When the program returned, Augustus Miller looked uncomfortable. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been notified of a court decision that prevents us from continuing this specific interview or showing any recordings made at the Miller residence. We apologize to our viewers and will return with our alternative, programming. The camera briefly captured Bianca's shocked face before cutting to a documentary about Floridian cuisine. Edward turned off the television, the silence in the room charged with unexpressed emotions. She won't stop, Deborah said finally. This was just the beginning. No, she won't stop, Edward agreed. But neither will we. The next morning brought the expected reaction. Their phones wouldn't stop ringing with calls from the press. The hashtag #Miller case dominated social media, and conspiracy theories proliferated online. Jessica arrived early, bringing mixed news. The good news is that the police raid found the recording equipment installed in the house, confirming the illegal invasion of privacy. Bianca now faces additional charges for that. And the bad news? Edward asked. The story has become a national sensation. It's in all the major outlets. The polarization is intense, with people fervently defending both sides. Sophia, fortunately, remained protected from the turmoil, entertained with her educational toys and therapy sessions, surrounded by people who genuinely cared for her well-being. Edward had decided not to give immediate response interviews, preferring a more strategic approach. Instead, his legal team issued a formal statement. We deeply regret the public exploitation of a delicate family situation, especially considering it involves a child with special needs. We reaffirm our confidence in the judicial system and the objective medical reports that document the reality of the facts. Out of respect for Sophia, we will refrain from turning her life into a media spectacle. The strategy was clear: to position themselves as the responsible party focused on the child's well-being, in contrast to Bianca's sensationalist tactics. In the late afternoon, as the media clamor seemed to be reaching its peak, Edward received an unexpected call. It was Mrs. Peterson, the former housekeeper who had been temporarily let go during the household restructuring. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice tense, "I have something important to tell you. Something about Mrs. Bianca and about Mrs. Helen." Edward put the call on speakerphone so Deborah could hear. "What is it, Mrs. Peterson?" I knew things. I saw things. At the time I was afraid to speak up. Mrs. Bianca had a lot of power and I needed the job. But now seeing all this on television, what things did you see, Mrs. Peterson?" Edward insisted gently. Mrs. Helen, before what happened, she started to suspect the medicines Mrs. Bianca was giving her. Once I saw her replacing the contents of Mrs. Helen's vitamin bottles. There was a heavy pause. And after Mrs. Helen was gone, I saw how Mrs. Bianca started doing the same with little Sophia's medicine. Edward closed his eyes, the pain evident on his face. "Why didn't you say anything, Mrs. Peterson?" "I tried, sir, once, but you were so distant. You said I was imagining things, that Mrs. Bianca only wanted what was best for the family." Her voice trembled. "After that I was scared. Mrs. Bianca made it clear that if I spoke up again, I would lose not only my job, but also my reference to get another one." Mrs. Peterson's revelation was like a final piece falling into a macabre puzzle. Edward thanked the housekeeper and asked her to repeat her testimony to the police, which she promptly agreed to do. When he hung up, Edward remained silent for long moments, the weight of guilt visible on his shoulders. "It wasn't your fault," Deborah said softly. "You were grieving, vulnerable after losing Helen. Bianca is manipulative and calculating." "But I should have noticed," he replied, his voice choked with emotion. "Helen tried to warn me. Mrs. Peterson tried. And I, blinded by grief and the convenience of having someone take over all responsibilities, just ignored the signs." Deborah had no words of comfort that could erase that reality. Instead, she offered the only thing she could. "The important thing is that you see now, and Sophia has you back, the father she always needed." The week that followed was intense. Mrs. Peterson's testimony significantly strengthened the case against Bianca, leading to the revocation of her bail. The investigation into Helen's death was intensified, with an exhumation authorized for more detailed toxicological analysis. In the media, the tide began to gradually turn. Investigative journalists dug deeper into Bianca's past, uncovering disturbing patterns, other relationships with wealthy men, always followed by unproven accusations of manipulative or exploitative behavior. Still, a fervent core of supporters continued to defend Bianca, spreading conspiracy theories about how she was being silenced by Edward's economic power. The polarization reflected broader social divisions. For many, Edward represented the privileged elite, while Bianca, ironically, was seen as the wronged outsider. Amid this turmoil, the Miller mansion transformed into a protective haven for Sophia. Edward, determined to make up for years of emotional neglect, completely reorganized his professional priorities. Delegating responsibilities to be present in his daughter's life, Deborah, for her part, faced her own dilemma. Her position in the house, initially so clear as an employee, then as Sophia's therapeutic companion, had evolved into something indefinable. She and Edward had developed a partnership based on mutual respect, trust, and increasingly evident to both, feelings that neither allowed themselves to openly explore given the tumultuous context. One afternoon, while Sophia was in her physical therapy session by the pool, Edward found Deborah organizing educational materials in the girls' room. "I need to tell you something," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "I received an offer to move the company headquarters to New York." Deborah felt a tightness in her chest that surprised her with its intensity. "Oh, would that be good for business?" "Strategically, yes. Closer to major clients, access to specialized technical talent. He paused significantly. But I'm not going to take it. Why not? Because Sophia's life is here. Her therapies, her routine, the people who care about her. His eyes met Deborah's. You are here. Those 3 simple words carried enormous weight. It was the first time either of them had openly acknowledged the other's importance beyond Sophia's well-being. Edward... Deborah hesitated, unsure how to navigate this uncharted territory, especially with all of Bianca's accusations still hanging over them. Maybe now is not the time to... I know, he interrupted gently. I'm not asking for anything. I'm not pressuring you. I just wanted you to know that when all of this is over, when Sophia is completely stable and the legal battles are finished, we will have a conversation about the future, about possibilities. Deborah nodded, a mix of conflicting emotions, hope, fear, anticipation crossing her face. When all of this is over, she agreed. That night, as Edward was putting Sophia to bed, a ritual he now performed religiously every night, Deborah received a message from Jessica that would change everything. Urgent. New developments in the case. I need to speak in person. I'll be there in 30 minutes. When Jessica arrived, her expression communicated the gravity of the situation before she even spoke. Edward, Deborah, and she gathered in the office, away from the ears of Sophia, who was already fast asleep. The preliminary results from the exhumation are in, Jessica announced without preamble. They found traces of a specific toxic substance in Helen's tissues. The same substance was found in vials in Bianca's apartment. Edward closed his eyes. The confirmation of his worst suspicions, clearly too painful to face directly. There's more, Jessica continued. The police found a secret safe in the apartment. Inside were documents detailing financial transfers from offshore accounts linked to Bianca, to Dr. Williams, the doctor who prescribed the medications for Sophia. So he was being paid to over-medicate my daughter, Edward concluded, his voice dangerously controlled. Exactly. And there's evidence that the ultimate plan was indeed to have Sophia permanently committed, declare her totally incompetent, and take control of her trust fund, which, as we discovered, is substantially larger than initially thought. Helen, apparently, had inherited a considerable fortune from her family that she left exclusively to Sophia. The implications were clear and devastating. Bianca's plan had been meticulously calculated from the beginning. Get close to Edward when he was vulnerable, remove Helen from the picture, and then gradually isolate Sophia, preparing the ground for her eventual commitment and control of her assets. With this new evidence, Jessica concluded, the criminal case against Bianca has been significantly strengthened. The prosecutor is confident there will be a conviction. When Jessica left, Edward and Deborah remained in the office, absorbing the impact of the revelations. The definitive confirmation that Helen had been deliberately poisoned by Bianca, the woman Edward had trusted to help him overcome that very loss, was a devastating blow. How am I ever going to explain all this to Sophia one day? Edward asked, almost to himself. How do I tell her that while I was lost in my own grief, I allowed the person who took her mother from her to also drug her into apathy, planning to discard her in an institution? You didn't know, Deborah replied firmly. And when you found out the truth, you acted. You fought for her. That's what she'll remember, Edward. That's what matters now. He nodded slowly, trying to absorb that perspective. You know what's most ironic? In the midst of all this darkness, something good happened. I got my daughter back. I really got to know her for the first time, and he looked directly at Deborah. I found you. Those simple words, spoken in a moment of genuine vulnerability, broke down the last barriers between them. Deborah moved closer, taking Edward's hands in hers. We'll face this together, she said. One day at a time. For Sophia, he agreed, and for us. The next morning, the Miller case took a final, definitive turn. Bianca, confronted with the overwhelming evidence against her and facing the prospect of multiple serious charges, accepted a plea deal with the prosecution. In exchange for a reduced sentence, she confessed in detail to her crimes, including the gradual poisoning of Helen and the abusive medication of Sophia. The news was a bitter relief for Edward. On one hand, the confession spared everyone, especially Sophia. the trauma of a prolonged and public trial. On the other, hearing the details of the confession, the calculated coldness with which Bianca described her actions was an excruciating ordeal. "Is it finally over?" Deborah asked when Edward returned from the meeting with the prosecutors, his face exhausted, but with a new kind of peace. "The legal case, yes. Bianca will spend many years in prison. The battle in public opinion, well, there will always be those who believe in conspiracy theories, but the confession is settling the matter for most people." That night after Sophia was put to bed, Edward invited Deborah for a conversation on the veranda, the place that had become a sort of sanctuary for their most important talks. The Miami sky shone with thousands of stars, and the breeze carried the scent of the garden flowers. "I was thinking about what you asked me," Deborah said after a few moments of comfortable silence. "What?" "Sophia asked me if I would stay here forever," she explained. "At the time, I didn't know what to say. Now I think I do." Edward turned to face her, his expression attentive, hopeful. "My place is where I can make a difference," Deborah continued. "For a long time, I thought that would be in a classroom. Then I thought it could be here, helping Sophia. Now I realize it's more than that." She paused, gathering her courage. "My place is where my heart is, and my heart is with you two." Edward reached out, gently touching Deborah's face. "When Sophia asked me who you were to us, do you know what I answered? I said you were the person who taught us to see again. I was blinded by grief. Sophia was trapped in a world of shadows created by Bianca, and you brought light to us both, slowly. With the caution of one who recognizes the preciousness and fragility of the moment, Edward leaned in. The kiss they shared was gentle, a silent promise, a new beginning. 6 months later, the Miller mansion was unrecognizable. The once sterile walls now displayed colorful works of art, mostly by Sophia, but also by local artists Edward had begun to collect. Helen's old studio had been renovated and transformed into a creative space where Sophia spent hours painting, always under the proud gaze of her father and Deborah. Sophia's recovery had exceeded all medical expectations. Free from the inappropriate medications and surrounded by love and proper stimulation, she flourished every day. Her speech had become clear and expressive, her social skills developed naturally, and she demonstrated artistic talents she had clearly inherited from Helen. Edward had completely restructured his professional life, delegating responsibilities that allowed him to be present for his daughter, while keeping the company running efficiently. The experience of almost losing Sophia to his own neglect had irrevocably transformed his priorities. As for Deborah, she had found a new calling. Inspired by Sophia's journey, she returned to education, not in a traditional classroom, but by founding a project for children with special needs in the suburbs of Miami, funded by the newly created Miller Foundation. While Sophia played in the garden with friends from her new, inclusive and stimulating school, Edward approached Deborah, hugging her from behind as they watched the scene. "Do you ever wonder how we got here?" he murmured against her hair. "How so much horror could turn into so much light?" Deborah turned in his arms, looking at the man who now shared her life, her mission, her heart. "I believe we are defined not by what happens to us, but by how we respond to it. You could have remained trapped in guilt, in pain. Instead, you chose to rebuild, to grow, to love again." Edward smiled, stroking her face tenderly. "I had a good teacher." At that moment, Sophia ran up to them, her face lit with the simple, pure joy that only truly loved children can express. "Daddy, Deborah, come see what we made." Hand in hand, they followed the girl to an area of the garden where she and her friends had created an elaborate sand city. In the center, 3 colorful clay figures clearly represented a family: a tall man, a woman with curly hair, and a small girl between them. "It's us," Sophia explained proudly. "Our family." Edward and Deborah exchanged emotional glances. The word family, spoken so naturally by Sophia, was the confirmation of what they already knew in their hearts. The bonds that united them were not defined by blood or papers, but by daily choices of love, protection, and presence. Later that night, after a lively meal with Sophia's friends and their parents, when the house finally fell silent, Edward, Deborah, and Sophia sat on the veranda for their nightly ritual of stargazing. "Did you know that stars are like families?" Sophia said, surprising the adults with her observation. "How so, sweetie?" Deborah asked. My teacher, Mrs. Lucia, explained. Some stars were born together, others met later. Some shine very brightly, others less so. But together they form constellations, pictures in the sky. She pointed up. Like us. We weren't born together, but we make a beautiful picture. Edward hugged his daughter, amazed by her simple wisdom. That's exactly right, Princess. Exactly right. When Sophia finally went to bed, Edward and Deborah remained on the veranda, contemplating the starry sky that Sophia had so poetically compared to their own family journey. You know what impresses me most? Deborah reflected. How Sophia, despite everything she's been through, carries no bitterness. She simply embraces the present, the joy of now. Children have this instinctive wisdom that we often lose as adults, Edward agreed. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson Sophia has taught us, the power to start over, to see possibilities where others would only see scars. That night, as Miami fell asleep under the starry sky, the house that had once been the stage for so much darkness housed an improvised family, united not by fate or obligation, but by conscious daily choice. A family that had learned the hard way that true love is not possession or control, but freedom and presence. That real bonds are forged in storms, tested in fire, and emerge stronger, brighter, like the constellations Sophia so admired in the night sky. And when the night breeze brought the scent of the garden flowers, that same garden where Helen used to paint with her daughter, it seemed to also bring a whisper of approval, her silent blessing for the new family constellation shining under the stars of Miami. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Edward, Sophia, and Deborah has touched your hearts. To follow more emotional narratives like this, we have prepared a special playlist with stories that explore family ties in all their complexities. Find it by clicking on the left. If this journey of overcoming love and new beginnings resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like. Every day we bring unique stories that celebrate human resilience and the transformative power of true love. And have you ever experienced or witnessed a new beginning as powerful as this family's? Tell us in the comments, from which city in the US are you following our stories? Your participation is what gives meaning to our work. Until next time.